good day everyone. I am introducing the different types of utilitarianism, the topic, and the members. For topic number 1, utilitarianism in general, the action is permissible, it promotes pleasure or happiness for the majority. So Ms. Lian Valdez will reporting this topic.
Thank you, Mr. Sampadong. For today's broadcast, I will be reporting on topic number 1, explain utilitarianism in general. Utilitarianism is a custom originating from the English philosophers and economists Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, according to which action is right if it tends to stimulate happiness or pleasure, and wrong if it manages to spawn unhappiness or pain, not just on the doer of the action but also for everyone else that is affected by it. As quoted by John Stuart Mill, it is not enough to base the goodness of the action from the act alone. If we do so, we can only get the quantity of pleasure. Utilitarianism is an ethical principle that states that an action is right if it tends to promote happiness for everyone involved, not just the agent. As a result, utilitarians emphasize the effects of an act rather than the intrinsic nature of the agent's motivation. Classical utilitarianism is hedonist, although it can be used to value things other than or in addition to pleasure. It can also be, more neutrally and in popular economics version, anything that appears as an object of rational or informed desire can be viewed as valuable. The utility maximizing test can be applied directly to single acts, or indirectly through other relevant moral assessment objects such as standards of behavior. Unlike the different consequentialist ethical philosophies, Bentham and Mill are concerned with the general welfare and prosperity of the population. Because of the reasonable cost that must be addressed, Bentham does not advocate that the figure be included in every action of moral judgment. It is the only ethical framework that may justify armed forces or conflicts. Because it accounts for costs and benefits, it is also the most prevalent form of moral reasoning utilized in commerce. However, because we cannot forecast the future, it is difficult to ascertain whether the effects of our choices will be positive or negative with confidence. The utilitarian principle does not apply to just human activities. The utilitarian standard, according to Mill, is not the agent's true pleasure but the highest quantity of happiness overall. That's all for topic number 1 report. Back to you, Mr. Sampadong.
So thank you about that report, Ms. Valdez. So let's go for topic number 2. Explain the consensualism and its other forms. The act is good if the result is good, and the act is bad if the consequence is bad. And Ms. Winnie Sardido will report this topic.
Thank you, Mr. Sampadong. For today's broadcast, I will going to report the topic number 2, explain consequentialism and its other forms. Consequentialism is an ethical theory that judges whether or not something is right by what its consequences are. Consequentialism is based on 2 principles. Whether an act is right or wrong depends only on the results of that act. The more good consequences an act produces, the better or more right that act. Examples of consequentialism are utilitarianism and hedonism. Utilitarianism judges consequence by a greatest good for the greatest people standard. Hedonism says something is good if the consequence produces pleasure or avoids pain. Consequentialism can lead to objectionable decisions in certain situations, even though the consequences are possibly good. In classic consequentialism, the end justifies the mean. For example, suppose we could prove that the world economy would be powerful and that most people would be happier if we just enslave 2% of the population. Back to you, Mr. Sampadong.
So thank you about that report, Ms. Sardido. So next is topic number 3. Explain hedonic calculus with application when an individual has to make moral decision. One measures the value of action or law according to the metric hedonic calculus, and there are 7 types of application in hedonic calculus. So Mr. Kyle Tondo will reporting this topic.
Magandang umaga mga kabrigada, tayo po ay nag-uulat para sa hedonic calculus. So what is hedonic calculus? So the hedonic calculus is the one of the central idea of Vietnam accumulatism, created by combining hedonism, the pursuit of pleasure, and avoidance of pain, and democracy major rules. The hedonic calculus is used to evaluate how much pleasure or pain would be caused by an action. This calculus consists of the 7-part intensity, which is simply how intense the pleasure of an act will be. Duration, how long the pleasure will last. Essentially, we can guarantee the pleasure will arise from the action. Faucindity, whether or not pleasure will be continued to be pleasurable if an action is repeated. Comparison, how far away the pleasure is in terms of physical space or time. Purity, how pure an action can be considered to be, and also this is the extent how many people will be affected. To put this into an example, we say we're given 1,000,000 pounds. If we keep it all to ourselves, the pleasure would be very intense. Would have a very long duration. But if we share it among our family, we could have the pleasure affect a greater number of people. Should be than that. Hedonic calculus is created to value the aspect of a consideration, how worthwhile for a correct by R in terms of the amount of pleasure they bring into the room. This is Kyle Stephen, nagbabalita mga kabrigada. Maraming salamat.
So thank you about that report, Mr. Tondo. So let's move to topic number 4. We'll explain the utilitarian maxim. Utilitarianism would say that an action is right if it results the happiness of the greatest number of people in a society group. The greatest good for the greatest number of people. So Ms. Roslyn Villanueva will reporting this topic.
Utilitarianism is a moral philosophy that supports action that promote happiness while rejecting those which create unhappiness. When applied to a socio-political framework, utilitarianism advocates the greatest of good for the greatest of number of people. Utilitarianism is a logical way to determining what is right and wrong, but it has limitations. Feelings and emotions, culture and justice are not considered by utilitarianism. Furthermore, ethical philosophy states that if a decision gives the greatest good to the greatest number of people, then the decision is acceptable, even if it affects a small number of individuals. This is often referred to as the democratic rule of making decisions based on the majority of opinions.
Thank you about that report, Ms. Villanueva. So, topic number 5. Differentiate and expound about Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism and John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism, since according to Jeremy Bentham, this norm find the problem that during his time lies the incapability or the loss to help people attain happiness, and for John Stuart Mill, it is not enough to base the goodness of action from the act alone. So Mr. Kendrick Valdez and Girly Onana will reporting this topic.
Thank you, Mr. Sampadong. For today's broadcast, we will report to my partner Kendrick Valdez. Topic number 5. Differentiate and expound on Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism and John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is an English philosophy. It is a theory of morality. It is a tradition of ethical philosophy. It advocates action that foster happiness or pleasure and opposites action that cause unhappiness or harm when directed toward making social, economic, or political decisions. Utilitarian philosophy would aim for a betterment of society as a whole. It would say that an action is right if a result in the happiness of a greatest number of people in a society or a group. These are the main difference between Bentham's theory and Mill's theory. Bentham advocated that the pleasure and the pains differ in quantity and not in quality. He said that the pains and pleasure can be computed mathematically. But Mill said that the pain and pleasure can't be measured arithmetically and differ in quality only. According to Bentham's utilitarianism, there is a gulf between individual interest and general happiness, but Mills narrowed down the gulf between individual interest and general happiness. Bentham recognized only external sanction, but Mills recognized not only external but internal sanction, also which would constrain the individual to promote general happiness, because every individual possesses a feeling for the happiness of mankind.
Topic number 5. Differentiate and expound on Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism and John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism. Bentham's principle of utility in a society of wolves would exalt wolfishness. In a society of saints, it would exalt saintliness. But according to Mill, saintliness should be the great criterion of utility in a society whatsoever. Bentham's utilitarianism supports the greatest good of the greatest number. But here, there is a chance for suppression of rights, so Mill supported individualism. Bentham supported the democratic government in any condition, but Mill supported monarchy for primitive men and democratic government for able people and the value of democratic government. It means Mill supported democracy based on the condition of man. Bentham purely did not accept state intervention in the individual's liberty, but Mill supported state control over the institution of private property by holding that it can well impose taxation on the socially created values. However, Mill reformed the utilitarian concept with his liberal thoughts, but according to criticism made by in all these alterations that he makes in Benthamism, Mill makes think that he is defending it, but it is destroying it. The utilitarian approach to political obligation demolished the theories of divine rights, natural rights, and social contract. This concept placed the individual before the state. It is altruistic but not egoistic. At present, the concept of utilitarian became the core concept of all. The theocratic government is based on the principle of the greatest happiness of the greatest number. Though the concept is not free from lacunas, they can be reduced in the implementation of the principle. That's all for topic number 5. Back to you, Mr. Sampadong.
So thank you for about that report, Mr. Valdez and Ms. Anana. So let's move to topic number 6. Give us the examples of Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism and examples of John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism to understand more viewers about this topic. So Ms. Roslyn Villaruel and Mr. Ralph Santiago will report this topic.
Thank you, Mr. Sampadong. For today's broadcast, I will be reporting on topic number 6, examples of Jeremy Bentham's utilitarianism. Jeremy Bentham was a philosopher, economist, jurist, and legal reformer, and the founder of modern utilitarianism, an ethical theory holding that actions that are morally right if they tend to promote happiness or pleasure, and morally wrong if they tend to promote unhappiness or pain, among all those affected by them. An example of role utilitarianism in business is tied up pricing for a product or service for different types of customers. In the airline industry, for example, many planes offer first, business, and economy class seats. Customers who fly in first or business class pay a much higher rate than those in economy seats, but they also get more amenities. Simultaneously, people who cannot afford for the greatest number of people. And the airline benefits too. The more expensive upper class seats help to ease the financial burden that the airline created by making room for the economy class seat. Utilitarian ethics. An example of utilitarian ethics could be when pharmaceutical companies release drugs that have been governmentally approved, but with non-minor side effects because the drug is able to help more people than are bothered by the side effects. Utilitarianism often demonstrates the concept that the end justifies the means, or it's worth it. Thank you.
Good day. This is Ralph Santiago. Today, I'll be reporting on topic number 6, examples of John Mill's utilitarianism. So, Mill defines utilitarianism as the notion that the rightness or wrongness of an act is wholly determined by the happiness and unhappiness. It causes not only the happiness and unhappiness of the person whose action it is, but the happiness and misery of everyone touched by the action, that an activity is appropriate if and only if it creates more good than bad on balance than any alternative action accessible to the person. He defines pleasure or happiness as the sole intrinsic good within. In business situation, utilitarianism says that firms must do all possible to increase happiness while minimizing pain. As a result, utilitarianism provides a foundation for opposing commercial practices that damage anybody. The most significant shortcoming of utilitarian ethics is that it is difficult to implement in the workplace. People are trained to prioritize themselves before others, making utilitarianism difficult to implement. You can, however, create the sort of work environment that you want for. Generally speaking, Mill's ethics is positivistic and empirical. Moral principles are justified in practice by their utility to human well-being. The moral standards of common sense, in particular, such as speaking truly, are derived from the realization for their value as established on historical knowledge and experience. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you about that report, Ms. Villaruel and Mr. Santiago. So that's all for our report. We hope that you will learn and understand about our topic. So good day and God bless.